Tommy Rex, and you're listening to today's Boondoggle.
This is Mark Metcalf, and you are listening to today's Boondoggle with Bailey on Domain Cleveland Radio.
You are listening to today's Boondoggle with Bailey on Domain Cleveland Radio. Yes, Kato Kalin listens to this all the time.
Welcome to today's Boondoggle. Now, here's your host.
Incarceration, America's rock, metal, and tattoo festival returns this summer with Limp Bizkit, Disturbed, Bad Omens, plus Gojira, Papa Roach, A Day to Remember, Motionless in White, Ice Nine Kills, Cypress Hill, The Used, and so many more. Incarceration at the Ohio State Reformatory, July 17th to 19th. Passes on sale now at incarceration.com.
What's going on, everybody? It's Bill Bailey with today's Boondoggle. And I could talk to this man for hours, and we almost were going to get started before we even hit record. My friend and somebody I very much look up to on my journey. And it's been an honor to get to know you, Mr. Johnny Velcro. How are you doing, Johnny?
I'm doing great, Billy. I know you're doing great.
Oh yeah, man. And I thank you for being a part of my journey to make sure I stay sticking to the winners like you. And we'll get into that. But when I have people on for the first time, I like to go like way back. So do you remember when you were little Johnny, what you originally wanted to be when you grew up?
I don't know. I probably wanted to be a policeman or a firefighter or a gangster. One of those three things.
Those were the options there where you grew up there in Boston, right?
Yeah. I grew up in South Boston, and Whitey Bulger, actually, his club was right next door to my house. I knew all those guys. I used to see them on a daily basis. They would come in and out of the club, and it was kind of a crazy neighborhood, everybody, I come from, my neighborhood was mostly Irish Catholic. There were bar rooms on every corner. I mean, you couldn't get by a block without seeing a bar room. A lot of the dads, not so much the Irish mothers, but the dads. Well, it was a big Irish Italian neighborhood where I grew up. The moms were tough women, they came from, the moms come out of the Depression. This was, I was born in 1953. So, I don't think anybody was really doing well. But, the dads, I would say 80% of the dads were alcoholics. I had never heard of, AA or any of that stuff when I was a kid. The moms used to just sit outside on the stairs and wait for their kids to come home. We used to have to be in when probably like a lot of people here, when the street lights went on, we had to be in the house. That's the way it went,
Oh yeah.
Which is unusual because you'd be playing in the dark for probably an hour before they put the street lights on. But when the lights went on, that was your signal to go home. And then you'd go home and
before smartphones to remind us and stuff, they had a program.
So we would go in, and that time I think there was only 3 stations on TV. There was I think in my neighborhood it was 4, 5, and 7. Those are the only 3 stations you could get. And you'd have to hold the antenna for your father because he was the guy who would be watching the TV. I remember you'd have to wrap aluminum foil around the antenna. We used to do everything to keep Dad happy. He'd come home and he'd want to watch, what's that guy? I forget his name now. There'd be a few comedian shows on TV he used to love to watch. And then we'd get him his beer, he'd be sitting there after a day of work, and it would be a big deal to be the one brother that would be the first one to the refrigerator to get him a beer and open it and bring it back to him. And yeah, it was just easy, pretty easy life back then. Um, I used to love playing baseball. I used to play Little League. I was very good at Little League. I think that was my escape. When I was a kid, I made the All Stars when I was 11 and 12. Yeah, I was a pretty good ball player. And I think the reason I played ball was to get out of the house. My house was kind of chaotic. I had
Yeah.
a sister that was a year older than me, and she was mentally challenged. And, my dad was pretty much a drunk. So there was always chaos in my house. Uh,
And when was
I,
it that you decided to serve your country?
well, I wanted to get out of the house as soon as I could. Like I said, my house was pretty chaotic. And, my neighborhood was Uh, my neighborhood was very patriotic. There was American flags all over the place. Uh, Everybody in my neighborhood had served in the Pacific or World War II. You'd see a lot of guys from the neighborhood that were, you know, disabled from the wars. And yeah, it was just kind of what kids in my neighborhood did. We had the most kids per capita killed in Vietnam from my neighborhood. We got a memorial up the street for like 24 young kids that got killed in Vietnam. If you go out to a place we call Castle Island, which was an old fort, Edgar Allan Poe actually served there many years before when he was in the military. It was called Castle Island. It's a beautiful place if you ever go to South Boston or Boston and you ask it. It's just a beautiful area where people walk around this lagoon. Uh, it's just beautiful. I remember as a kid always going out there with my grandfather. They had a fishing dock. My grandfather was a big fisherman. Me and all my cousins, there was like 20 boy cousins, and we're all like the same age from, my mother had a bunch of sisters, and all the sisters had 8 kids or 6 kids or 5 kids. And, half of them were boys, and our mothers used to lay on the beach with those album covers with the aluminum foil on them, probably, back in the day, probably. Actually, I remember my father's favorite song was "Won't You Come Home, Bill Bailey." So here I am. I've come
Nice.
home, Bill Bailey,
Nice.
and
Coming full circle here.
yeah, so it came full circle. So we would get down the beach, and our mothers were young women at the time. They'd be laying out with their one piece bathing suits on and getting sun, and then all us kids would go out to Castle Island with our grandfather, and we'd bait his hooks, and he'd have a couple of fishing poles, and we'd take turn fishing. I was never a big. I never liked really going. I wasn't one of the grandchildren that caught a lot of fish. I was more interested in playing in the playground that was nearby. But anyways, my grandfather used to make us mackerel and scrambled eggs in the morning. I'd be like, oh my God, who the hell wants to eat fish and eggs? But I ate a lot of mackerel and I ate a lot of scrambled eggs. At that time, you would eat whatever they gave you. They
Yeah.
tell you that there was kids starving in China that would love to have that, even though I
Yep.
never see too many Chinese kids eating scrambled eggs and mackerel. But yeah. But
Yeah. It wasn't
anyways,
up for debate back then. Yeah.
to get back to your question, Billy, I joined the Marines when I was 17. The delayed entry program. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
Yeah.
And
I
then when
went
I
through
turned
that.
18, I went down to Paris Island and joined the Marines. I joined the Marines, and then as soon as I got out of high school, I didn't hang around. I got right into the Marines in the July of that year in 1973 and served my country. So, and at the same thing, I got out of my house, which was, like I said, very chaotic.
And then coming from, where you grew up and the environment you grew up in, what was like the transition like, going through Marine boot camp and getting into the military?
Well, it's kind of funny, but myself and both of my brothers were in the Marines. My older brother, Tommy, was over in Vietnam in 1968 when it was pretty bad. And right around that time, it was going crazy in my neighborhood. They had all the gang wars. There was all the Irish mafia were fighting with the Winter Hill guys, and there was people in my neighborhood getting shot. I think my mother was happier my brother was in Vietnam than she was in the neighborhood because the neighborhood was crazy. They were having drive-by shootings. At this time, I think right around that time, there were a lot of gangsters in my neighborhood they were finding in the trunks of cars, buried over in Marina Bay with the fishes, as they say. And it was just crazy. The late 60s in Boston was really crazy times for the gangs. So, like I said, I loved everybody in my neighborhood. It was funny. You'd see a gangster and then you'd see that same guy. He'd be in church on Sunday with his mother. I mean, it was just crazy. The mothers used to fist fight in my neighborhood. I remember getting beat up one time by a couple of Whitey's boys, and my mother, uh, my mother wanted to go fight the guy that was beating me up. She wanted to go fight the guy's mother. It was just crazy. These Irish moms were tough cookies, and yeah, I mean, you know, uh, we respected everybody in the neighborhood. I mean, it was a great neighborhood to grow up in. It was just, I don't know. I think like every kid, like Mark Twain or whatever, Samuel Clemens, all his writings, I think at 17, 18, all of us kids wanted adventure, and I mean, I had never even left South Boston. We used to go on vacation maybe 30 miles away from our house. Nobody ever traveled. You never even thought about getting on an airplane. I don't even know too many people that were on airplanes back in those days. Back in the 60s, even early 70s, the way you got to Paris Island was you went by train. But when I joined it, it changed. We went down to Logan Airport, got on a plane, and from Logan Airport, they flew us to Washington. From Washington, we got on another plane and they flew us to Paris Island. And then, I mean, they flew us to South Carolina. I think it was Beaufort. And then from Beaufort, we took a bus to Paris Island, and we got on those little yellow footprints that I'm sure a lot of your listeners probably can relate to.
Oh
And
yeah.
then, yeah, and then I had, at that time, if you went in the Marines for 2 years, they figured you'd go in, you'd finish boot camp, you'd finish infantry training, and then they'd ship you to Vietnam. And if, like my brother, if you survived, you got out. That's the way it was. I think I was one of the last guys that probably got a 2-year deal. After that, you had to go in for 3 or 4 years,
Yeah.
because the Vietnam War ended in, I think it was February, or they had the ceasefire or whatever you call it. But I think they started pulling all the Marines out of Vietnam in February of 1973. So I did all the jungle training and I did everything, but February of 73, they stopped sending Marines over to Vietnam. So uh,
I wanted to ask you about the jungle training. You'd mentioned that when you sent me your bio. Like what did that entail?
well, they took you to, we were on this ship called the Francis Marion. It was like an old pirate ship. I mean, it was named after Francis Marion, who was actually, he was the Swamp Fox. I don't know if you were a kid in my generation. They had a series called The Swamp Fox, and it was based on this guy, uh, Francis Marion, who was kind of like a jungle fighter in South Carolina. He fought from the swamps. And then when we had jungle training, they put us on the ship, the Francis Marion. It was decommissioned, I think, right after we trained on it. And it sent us to Panama Canal Zone. And in the Panama Canal Zone, they sent you out in the jungle for, I think it was maybe a week or 2 weeks. And then you had a survival where they would just leave you in the jungle and you'd have to figure out how to survive. And we did that. And then, after that, we went to Cuba. That was before Gitmo Bay. We went to Cuba, and we we let the guys who were on the wall in Cuba go on R&R, and then we were there for maybe a week or two, and then we went back to Camp Lejeune and, just continue training. And I think a lot of you listen, I just got finished with throat cancer, and they say that the water we were drinking in Camp Lejeune was poison. Obama actually signed a bill saying that a lot of Marines were poisoned by water at Camp Lejeune. My voice is still a little screwed up, but I just finished 35 radiation treatments for throat cancer. And I don't know. I was also a firefighter for 10 years, so I don't know what specifically it was related to, but I know the VA has taken good care of me with this throat cancer I've had.
Yeah, I want to get more into that story as well. But what was something that you feel like you always carry with you from your time in the Marine Corps?
Well, honestly, I'm 72. As my grandchild says, I'm 72 and a half. But what I carry is the discipline. I still try to do 50 push-ups a day. I still try to, like yourself, I try to work out. I try to get into a routine. The two kids I joined the Marines with are both dead. They both died of cancer. And I just think it's that military discipline that they put in your head. I mean, I still try to walk. I'm smart enough to know that once you lose your legs, you're in trouble. So I try to get out every day and do at least 4,000 or 5,000 steps. On a good day, I try to do 10,000 steps. But, I do know, Clint Eastwood says it all the time, you can't let the old man in. You got to wake up every morning, and I get on my knees and I thank God for another day. A lot of the kids I served with in the Marine Corps are dead. A lot of them have died from different cancers. I'm very grateful I'm alive, and I'm grateful I got rid of a lot of bad habits I had, drinking and drugs. And, Billy, after the Marines, I got on the Boston Fire Department, and I got hurt real bad by an arsonist, a young kid that his mommy wouldn't pay for him to go home for Christmas, so he decided to light a building on fire. And I don't want to swear, but I got screwed up really bad.
You could swear on here if you want. It's an adult show.
Well, the fire I went to, I got fucked up pretty bad, and
Yeah.
I had 5 broken ribs. I had a collapsed lung. My
That
whole
was the
left, my
Christmas
whole
Eve
left
one,
side,
right?
my whole left arm was all fucked up for a few years, and I had to retire from my job on the fire department that I loved. I always tell you that story about Billy. Has probably heard all my stories 100 times, but yeah, I relate my life to when I was a firefighter. A lot of people think about firefighting, how dangerous it is, but there is something as a firefighter I always remembered. No matter how bad the fire got inside the building, as a firefighter, you have a hose. And if you follow that hose, the hose is connected to the fire truck. So that if, no matter how tough the fire gets, if they call Mayday or something, you can always follow that fire truck. You can always follow that hose back to the fire truck. In other words, you can always leave that 6-alarm fire or whatever's going on and get back out to safety. And that's how I equate my life. I belong to AA now, and AA has become my lifeline. My life had become, I've been divorced twice. My life had become a 6-alarm fire. I had nothing but chaos and resentments, and I hated the kid that lit the fire, that ruined my career. I blamed everything on everything but myself. Billy and I got a good friend called Brad, and
Yeah.
Brad always says, I never learned to shut my fucking mouth. I didn't want to listen to anybody at all. I just wanted to do things Johnny Steiner's way, Johnny Velcro's way. And at the time, I really didn't have any good mentors. I didn't care about anything. I just cared about myself, you know. I got a beautiful 51-year-old son. I wish I could say he never seen me drink or do drugs, but unfortunately, that's not the way it went. But today, I just came back from visiting my son. He's 51. He just turned 51. He teaches filmmaking and editing in Santa Cruz University. He's a great kid. He's got a beautiful girlfriend. And, through AA and through doing what my friend Brad says, just shut the fuck up. When he wants to blame me for things, I let him blame me because I am to blame, you know. Like Brad says, I realized in AA what the problem was, and the problem was Johnny Steiner or Johnny Velcro. Not so much Johnny Velcro, because now I stick with the winners. But
Amen.
I've learned in life that sometimes you got to take responsibility for your actions. And I can honestly say today I've got a life that's second to none. I wouldn't give up this life for all the tea and China, as my mother used to say, even though I'm not a tea drinker.
I wanted to ask you, like going back to your time in the Marine Corps, what's like one of the first, I know there's got to be many, but probably the first one that pops up in your head. What's one of the funniest stories you feel you can share from your time in?
There was a lot of, as being a veteran, Billy, a lot of the, it's funny. I had a new captain at one time, and I'm not Jewish, but I had this captain. He was new, and they were going to go out in some maneuvers, and I told him I couldn't go because I was Jewish, And so I escaped getting on the Amtrak and going out. He gave me like KP or something where I got to spend the day on the ship. So that was nice. I'll always remember that, But I don't know, just I remember one time I was doing impersonations of my staff sergeant yelling to wake everybody up, and I was a pretty good impersonation. And I remember at the time I was almost ready to get out of the Marines, and he said, he let me out on July 13th, 1974, which was a Friday. And I remember he said to me, I hope your fucking plane crashes, because I was always doing impersonations of him. And yeah, I couldn't win everybody over, but as long as I had my platoon behind me and I made them laugh, that was a good thing. But I do remember this staff sergeant or sergeant kind of hating my guts. So that was I felt like a hero because the guys loved me, but my officer hated me. So that was always pretty funny to me. He was always giving me, I don't know if you guys know who was that comedian there. Oh my God, what was his name? He was married to Gene Wilder.
Yeah.
My favorite movies used to be the Gene Wilder movies where, my captain, my staff sergeant would give me extra duty, but it was worth it for me. At that time I was in great shape. They couldn't really physically do anything to me. But I remember like the Gene Wilder sense of humor, where Gene Wilder, he got in trouble and they took him out in the desert and they put him in this cage under the ground and they put this big metal top over the cage and they left him out there for 5 days, no water, no nothing. Then they went back out they opened the roof up and Gene Wilder said, please, 3 more days. And that was kind of my mentality in the Marines, So,
Nice.
and I don't know if you remember, but Gene Wilder, he was in jail and they put him in with the meanest motherfucker in jail there. And it ended up, they figured he'd get raped or beaten. And then when they opened the jail cell the next day, the two of them were playing poker. So that's kind of my view of life,
Nice.
So
And what would you say is one of your greatest hopes for the country you've been willing to give your life for?
I just like to see, it's like Rodney King. I just like to see us all get along. I hate to think of these young kids going into the military and having to go to war. I remember when I was 17, I'm like, oh boy, I want to go to Vietnam and come home a hero, because we had heroes in our neighborhood. You know, we'd always hear the stories about these guys from Korea. You know, you'd see a guy, and next thing his father would say, you know, he was a Marine and he was in the Pacific. He was in Guadalcanal. He got shot. You know, my dad used to always talk about these friends of his that got killed in World War II or killed in the Pacific. And I think when I turned 17, I said, yeah, I want to go in the Marines and be a big hero. And honestly, to a degree, I remember when I got on the fire department, I wanted to try to win some medals and be a hero. And then look, I ended up getting all screwed up and uh, you know, and at the time I thought it was the worst thing that was going to happen to me. I hope I'm not getting away from your question too much, Billy, but at the time I thought it was the worst thing that happened to me into my career at 42. But it ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me. So I think, you know, I think it's great to join the military and get some benefits. But my heart goes out to these kids that actually whose lives get all fucked up from PTSD. And you know, we know what happens. We, you know, when I was in, um, it was kind of crazy because they sent us to Panama for jungle training. Most of the guys I was with had already been to Vietnam and back. They were all fucked up dudes. Some of them were taking heroin, you know. And you look and you say, why would they send this guy to jungle training when he's already been to Vietnam? He's been busted from a sergeant down to a private. I mean, I was a Lance Corporal over. Two of the guys that were under me were Vietnam veterans, you know. And, you know, these were just guys that wanted to do their time and get out. And, you know, the stories they would tell me about their combat experiences, I'm like, wow, maybe I would have been that fucked up if, God forbid, it had happened to me. So, like you were saying about these kids, I mean, yeah, I think it's great to be a patriot, but I'd rather see no wars going on. I'd rather see all these countries, all of us live in peace. But you know, we all know that the only way you can have peace is through strength. So
Yeah.
I'll never disagree with that. I think you got to be the big dog to keep all these puppies in place. But it's unfortunate that a lot of these kids are going to come home fucked up. So I don't know. I just pray every day that we have. You know, I think I'm kind of selfish because I pray a lot that, you know, my kids and my grandchildren or whatever will have to see what these young men have seen in their military careers, you know. So, you know, I
Well,
have to agree with John Lennon, you know, we got to give peace a chance, but we also got to be in a position to keep the peace.
yeah, I agree. Now, what do you feel we can do to like break the stigma of PTSD and mental health?
You know, it's funny. I remember when I got out of the military, I was in Los Angeles, and you know, I also got hurt in a fire, so by an arsonist. So I was having a lot of issues in my life. And, you know, they sent us to this horse therapy. I don't know if you've heard of that, Billy, but
Yeah.
they send you out there and, you know, you're with all these guys that are, you know, Vietnam vets or Iraqi Afghan vets, these kids that have been through hell. And, you know, they gave us paintbrushes and we used to paint horses, or as we say in Boston, hosses. And they would give you these paints and you would paint on a horse, you know. And it's kind of, you talk about PTSD, but I remember being with these guys and they draw like 38s or M16 on the side of a horse, you know. And then after 6 or 7 weeks of this equine therapy, they'd be drawing hearts and sunsets, and you know they'd be really close to these horses, you know. And you
Hmm.
know, you say to yourself, wow. And I mean, even myself, after a few weeks of taking, you know, everybody would have a certain horse they would like, you know, and we would drive up to this certain part of California where they'd have a ranch, you know. And I think the best things for PTSD is meditating, but I know it's tough to I still can't meditate. You've heard my joke, Billy. I bought a meditation book for $45. Now I can't meditate because I figured I wasted fucking $45 on a meditation book, you know. But I know that the people I know, whether they were firefighters or veterans that had PTSD, they actually learned how to love again and how to care about life again by really, I think that equine therapy was helpful to me, and I think it really was helpful to people that didn't know how to deal with other people. But boy, it changed their lives. They really fell in love with these horses and this therapy. So I do think, I think kind of learning how to love again is the best, the best therapy for PTSD. And I think,
Mhm.
fortunately, whether it's a dog, a cat, or a horse, I think people first have to, we know, Billy, I see we go through it, but the first thing you got to learn is how to love yourself again.
Yeah.
So I think, I think some person's experience with what they've gone through is much worse than other people's experience, Like I
Yeah.
said, my brother Tommy was in Vietnam during the worst time. He was a radio man in Vietnam in 1968. I mean, the guys, you know, his they wrote a book about his company. He was overrun by the Vietnamese in Vietnam, and his CEO got killed, and there was, I think, 16 other guys that got killed that day. And he come back from Vietnam and he got on the police force. And I know he saw a lot of shit because, we've spoken about it. But, he did the whole body bag thing, and a guy in his foxhole was killed. And, I can't imagine what he went through. But I know only what I've dealt with in my life, and I know what's worked for me. But a lot of guys, they came home from war and they got on jobs and they got right back with their family and they put it behind them. Some people
Mhm.
can compartmentalize and do that, but a lot of people need help. And,
Yeah.
I think it's great what the VA tries to do for people. And I think it's great that other guys can come home and just go on with their lives.
Yeah.
Our mind is an amazing thing, you know. So I just hope people get the help they need for whatever it is they've seen.
Yeah, I've read a book about I think it was called The Body Keeps the Score though. So it's like, yeah, you can maybe shove stuff down for a little bit, but it'll come out some way. The body will get, tired of holding it, and it might come out in a different way physically, you know. Um that's why I think it's definitely important to try and get to the root and try and address it. I don't know, my dad was one of those guys. I don't know how he did it after World War II and invasion of Okinawa he was in, and he was able to just come home and I had a pretty good life, growing up with him. I never seen him drunk. Uh, I mean, I seen him angry. Yeah, he had, his anger issues and his PTSD, but I had a pretty good life. He was one of those guys that could do that. But
Well,
I
you
think
well, yeah.
if you would have dealt with the anger and stuff, it could have been a whole different.
Well, I
Well,
think like I was getting at with the whether it's a cat, a dog, or a horse. I think back to what we said about the military in general. It teaches us a discipline. And I think you're right. I think it does come out eventually. As even my brother, as he get older, he would talk more about it.
yeah.
Uh, but my grandfather fought in World War One. He had his eyes shot out in the Argonne Forest. The guy I'm named after, at a place called Verdun. Uh, and he never talked about anything uh, to my father. And he died of his war wounds when my father was 8. And
Mm.
my father went through life. He never even knew about his father. But when my father died, we went through stuff, and I found an old dog tag with my grandfather's military, his number. And I ended up Googling it, and I found out that my grandfather was a hero. He was one of 75 guys that went out on a mission. Sorry, Billy.
All right.
I gotta. He went 75 other guys, and their captain was what do you call it? Roosevelt. His captain was one of the Roosevelts, and he went out. Roosevelt didn't go out with them, but my grandfather went out with 75 men, and then they got ambushed by the Germans. And he was only a little guy. He ended up getting shot in the eye. He lost his eye, And he went, he, he got out of the hospital because of his wounds, and then because of the mustard gas they used in World War One, he died at the age of 36. My dad was 8, and like I said, my dad never knew any of this stuff. And then I found his dog tag, and I investigated, and it ended up 100 years after his death. I ended up getting my grandfather's uh, Purple Heart,
Wow.
which I have framed and keep it in my guest room. So,
Wow.
my grandfather obviously probably didn't talk much about the war at all, but we all know those World War One guys.
Yeah.
They went through hell. Those poor bastards.
And I
So
remember my dad would never want to talk about, his time in World War II. But after I came back from my last deployment and I got sober and we started connecting, and as he got older, he started opening up more and more to me about it. And that was, I couldn't imagine what he dealt with, but it was, you know, I think it was therapeutic for both of us for him to open up and share, a lot of that with me. We had got to talk about a lot of things, and that I wouldn't have gotten the privilege of having if I hadn't have got sober, too, to spend that time with him his final years. I
yeah. Let
wanted
me just show you. Let me show you the Purple Heart I got my grandfather.
wow,
And
incredible.
it came with the awards letter or whatever. It told, I got a thing framed that says exactly what he did. So
Wow.
I only wish my dad had been alive to see what me and my brothers and sisters did to get that medal.
Yeah. Now
But
you
Billy, I've heard a lot about your dad, and I know how proud you are of him. And I think, like, back to what we were saying, I think your dad, he had that discipline, and when he come home, he had his family. And I think, like we say about the cat, the dog, or the horse, or whatever it is that these guys finds soothing relief from. I think there's a lot of, like my brother, I think these guys come home, they started a family, and that was more important to them than anything they had seen in combat or during the war. I think they had that discipline to say, you know what, my family comes first. And I think with veterans, that's usually the way it goes. Unless we get into these addictions like alcohol and drugs.
yeah. Now you had wrote in what you sent me as well, and I was unfamiliar with this war, but you want to tell me a little bit about the Yom Kippur?
Yeah. Well, I was in this company 36, and in October of, I think October 6th of 1973, that Egypt and Syria try to get into Israel, and it was the start of the Yom Kippur War. And so I was in Camp Lejeune at the time, and then I had been doing nothing but training, and they sent my outfit over to the Mediterranean, uh, as a combat force in case we were going to go in and help Israel or whatever they were going to do with us. So they had this Yom Kippur War. I think it started on October 6th, and I think it ended around October 26th of
Hmm.
73. And then they had us, as being a former Navy, they had us on a amphibious assault ship, the USS Guadalcanal at the time. I don't even know if it's in service anymore, but they had us in Cyprus, and they had us around the area in case we had to move in. The old give us bayonets and gas mask and all that stuff. But fortunately, Nixon was drunk. Nixon was drunk, but Kissinger signed the 1973 peace accord. So it was kind of a couple of weeks, but a lot of people got killed. And yeah, I mean, I was glad to be a part of that Sixth Fleet. The Sixth Fleet, and it ended up the U.S. had shipped over all kinds of weapons for Israel to, to keep its sovereignty or whatever. So I feel in a way I was somewhat a little part of that with going over there and being ready to be deployed if necessary.
Yeah, what stuck out for me too is what you just mentioned too, working with the amphibious assault training that you did, because one of my units that I was in during my time in was an assault craft unit that was stationed down in Little Creek, Virginia, and I would drive those Mike 8 boats, that would hit the beach and drop the ramp, and then equipment and men could run off those boats. But didn't experience anything like that, but mostly training ops during
Well,
my time.
it's funny, Billy. It was funny. It wasn't funny at the time, but when they sent us over there, we had like Vietnam gear on. I always think, what the hell are you going to do in Vietnam with a drab green combat outfit on in the middle of a desert? But anyways, those amphibious vehicles, those Amtraks, we had been training for kind of jungle warfare, and then all of a sudden we get shipped over there, and we're in these amphibious tractors. And honestly, half the guys I was with couldn't even swim. They and then you get dropped off. I don't know if a lot of your viewers are familiar with an Amtrak, but you're inside like these little mini submarines with 12 other guys, full combat gear, and you got guys puking and yelling and screaming because when they drop them off the ship, as it basically goes right underwater, and then however they set it up, it ends up popping up. But when they first drop off the ship, a little bit of water comes in. You got these guys that have never really had any swimming lessons that are basically screaming inside this little Amtrak. I've actually been on a few of them where these guys are puking right inside this little small area. It's kind of a bad memory.
Yeah, yeah. Now I wanted to ask too. So when your time in the Marines is up and you come back home, I want to ask about fire. Going to fire school, and what kind of guided you to follow the route as a firefighter?
Well, I actually wanted to be a cop, but I think at the time I was so screwed up. I remember the psychiatrist asked me to draw a picture of a family, and you know better than anybody, Billy, as far as I was concerned. I had been a young kid. I joined the Marines. I think I probably learned about sex going out with prostitutes. My time in the military there, every Liberty Port you'd be with a different prostitute. So I remember the psychiatrist said, "Can you draw a picture of your family?" I think I drew a picture of some woman in a mini dress. She probably had $40 in her hand, and the psychiatrist probably said, "We don't want this guy as a police officer." So I'm half joking, but anyways, I heard from the fire department, and at that time I was a young kid, still looking for a little action in my life, and the fire department offered me that. I enjoyed the guys I worked with, just like the military. It's really no different than the military. You got a bunch of guys that are kind of motivated to save lives. God forbid there's a fire, and it's kind of semi or whatever military, and I still had that excitement in my veins to do something exciting. So I love being a firefighter.
And what was the training like for that?
It was kind of like the military. You go in the military and then they throw you in a gas chamber and they release the gas, and then you got to take your gas mask off and run outside. When I went to firefighter training, they taught you about how to fight fires, and they would actually put you in a building, and they would set these little fires, and then you would have to figure out how to crawl out of them, and then you would have to climb up ladders, and then they taught you how to operate a fire truck. kind of similar to the military, just teaching you all these different uh, survival, and then they would teach you training on all these different, equipments, like how to hook a hydrant onto the fire truck, and just it was almost. I think there's a word that goes with firefighter training being somewhat like military training, and yeah, I mean, like I said about grabbing a hose and going into a fire, and they teach you how to, you know, use the hoses, and how to carry people out of burning buildings, how to carry someone down a ladder. I mean, it seems like when you get in the military uh, or become a firefighter, there's no training for chaos. They cannot
Mm.
teach you. I mean, it's not like you go in a foxhole and you know what to expect, You don't know what's going to happen until, as they say, the shit hits the fan. So I think they just give you the basics, and then you become as creative as you want when the actual circumstances happen.
Yeah. Now, the the accident that you had already mentioned that ended your career as a firefighter. I think you had said too that was Christmas Eve.
Yeah, yeah, it was Christmas Eve, 1995. And like I said, this young kid, he wanted to go home. I think he was from Brazil or Colombia or something. He was going to school in Boston, and I think, from what I understand, I talked to an arson investigator that investigated it. I guess he had wanted to go home, and I don't think his mom or his parents wanted to send him the money to go home. So I think he got drunk, actually, or high, and he decided to light this fire in this building that was really fully occupied.
Mm.
And then when he lit the fire, he started waking people up. He wanted to be the hero. So
Mm.
he was screaming around, waking people up, telling them to get out of the building. There was a fire. And then the arson investigator figured out that this kid had lit the fire. So anyways, I was on a rescue company that night. I was on a tower unit, they call it, but it's pretty much a rescue company. Those are the guys that go up these big ladders and take people out of the windows. So it wouldn't be directly a rescue company, but it's somewhat of a rescue company. So the night of Christmas in 1995, Christmas Eve Day or whatever you want to call it, uh, we got called to this building in Boston. This kid had lit the fire. We were on Commonwealth Ave, which is a pretty big street in Boston. We couldn't get the tower ladder to the windows because uh, it was out in the street, and there was all these electrical. At that time, they had all these electrical wires going across the street. So it ended up that we had to run into the building. So I remember putting my gear on, running into the building. Uh, the last radio call I got that there was people trapped in the building. So we ran into the building, and we had some hand ladders. There's a big difference between a tower ladder that has a bucket on it that you can't get to the building because of all these wires and all that. So we ended up going into the building, and the ladder company had some people with ladders up against the windows, so they were able to do it that way. But anyways, we had turned from a tower company to a rescue company. So we ran into the building, uh, and it was very, very smoky. The first floor, there wasn't heat rises, smoke rises. So the first floor didn't seem to be that bad, but we went up to the second floor. And in the particular building I was in, they had what they call they were low sills. I don't know if you know what I mean. It wasn't like the sills to the windows were not waist high. They were kind of,
Mm.
like a little above the ankle high.
Yeah.
And a ladder company that had gotten there before us had ended up breaking all the windows on the second floor. So I remember getting up to the second floor and putting my mask on. and having a flashlight, but you really couldn't see too much in the flashlight because of the smoke. So it was kind of maybe a little bit of visibility around my flashlight. So I had gone up to the second floor. I went into a bedroom or something. I was feeling around, just, a lot of times kids hide under beds when they're scared, or they go into a closet. So I was looking to see if maybe a kid had been under the bed. And then I remember getting to a area where I thought it might have been a closet. I put my hand through, and it had been a low window, and it ended up that I tripped over the low windowsill and I went out the window,
Mm.
and I landed on my left side, and it was probably a 25-foot drop. So
Ooh.
I got pretty fucked up. I
Wow.
broke 5 ribs. I collapsed along. Uh, and it was December. The ground was frozen. I remember some guys they couldn't put me on a stretcher, so they had put me on a door they had ripped off, and they brought me out an alleyway, and then they brought me to the hospital, and then they tried to do the best they could for my arm, but they couldn't fully repair it at the time. So I spent about 2 or 3 years in therapy, and eventually I got back to fire duty, but I couldn't even get in a company that had a second floor. And then eventually I had operation after I had like 4 operations, and they decided that maybe the best thing for me to do would be to retire. So I just retired. So in like 1998, I ended up retiring. And as Bill knows, that was the end of my career. And it was the beginning of my drinking and drugging. So uh,
Yeah.
fortunately, AA has saved my life.
And I did want to get into that. Like when was it that what was it that finally brought you into AA?
Well, I'd been married twice. My life was a disaster. Um, I don't know. I just think, I just kind of reflected on my life and said, Jesus, you've basically fucked up everything that you've had the opportunity, like I said about not having a great relationship with my son. I had married a beautiful girl that had 2 kids uh, you know, and then, I ended up getting injured in 1995, and probably between 95 and 97, 98. I wasn't a great guy to be around. I was kind of miserable. So I ended up getting my second divorce. And then I started meeting friends of mine that had pretty good lives that were telling me about AA. I tried it a few times, but I thought all these people going there were full of shit. And then, you know, I just think, like I said, I hit my sixth alarm fire. My life was a disaster. And I had to follow something out you know, to my lifeline ended up being AA. There was nowhere else to turn. People were kind of getting turned off by my drinking and drugging. And
Mm.
I think it was just, as we say, I hit my rock bottom. And it ended up being the best decision I ever made. So here I am.
And I want to hear about the you mentioned it, you kind of touched on it earlier, but your nickname, Johnny Velcro. Tell me about coming up with that.
Well, when I began, it's funny, I skipped this totally, but a friend of mine who was on the fire department ended up getting injured, and he had gone out to LA, and he became a set designer. I don't know if you people know what a set designer is, but you see a war movie or whatever, but it could be only just a little square you're seeing, like they do this in Hollywood. You're in that little square. And my friend had become a set designer up in the American Film Institute. And he was living out in LA, and he said, geez, Johnny, it's nice out here. So I went out there on vacation, and I ended up falling in love with the California weather. And, my buddy was making all these sets and all this stuff. And I went out there and I fell in love with LA. So I took an acting course for 2 years. I was actually in a couple of movies and a couple of documentaries, and I might have been a corpse on the CSI Miami or something. But I just loved the life, you know. And yeah, I went to acting school for 2 years and met a lot of interesting people, and I ended up noticing a lot of these people in this entertainment business were in AA, you know. So I started going to some of these meetings. And then I went to a meeting in Studio City, and there was all these beautiful blonde women and all these interesting guys. And I went to the meeting, and I wasn't so much interested in stopping drinking or doing drugs, but I was interested in definitely in all these beautiful young girls that were in AA. And then I hung around long enough to realize that none of these women gave a shit about me. So I met this one woman, Susan, who I kind of credit with getting me interested in going to the meetings. And so I ended up doing my steps and going to all these different step meetings. And I even went to a few Al-Anon meetings because I have my sister who was mentally challenged back in Boston who, you know, she was finding it tough that I had moved to LA. And um, so I went to a few Al-Anon meetings, and I was hearing good stuff at both meetings. You know, how not to say things meanly to people and all this other stuff. And anyways, I started doing the steps in AA, and then I really started getting into it. And at some point, I actually felt like I had found a spiritual awakening. My life had completely changed. I started caring about other people rather than my ego. And yeah, it's been 14 years. I don't know if you remember Jimmy D. I think he was on the podcast. But I had
Yeah.
met Jimmy D in the Marines 50 somewhat years earlier. And yeah, I mean, the meetings, I think when I started caring about other people, it got me out of myself. I wasn't so, oh, poor is me. I got injured and I lost a job I loved. I started loving people in AA, and I started loving the steps. I started, you know, paying attention to what other people needed. And like Billy, I started seeing that there's a lot of people in AA that might be interested in hearing my story. You know, I still try to help out veterans, and uh, I still love helping people in AA. If I get a phone call from somebody and there's something I can do for them, I do it. I do it like that. I mean, that's you know, that's my rescue company nowadays. I want to
Mm.
save somebody that might have a bad marriage, or they might be going through some what they think is serious shit at the time with their ex-wives or their kids. I can be a good example. You know, at one time I was a good example of a bad example, but I hope to think of myself now as a good example of a good example. I get great people in my life like Billy and Jimmy D and JT. I mean, there's so many people I can tell you stories that they've told me that has completely helped me change my life. I'm not selfish anymore. You know, I asked my girlfriend today, what do you want for lunch? After the meeting, I'm going to go get a nice salad that we both love from a particular restaurant. You know, it's funny. I love that song, Mama, Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Cowboys. I've gone from the inner city, South Boston hood, as I call it, to living in Austin, Texas. So I guess I've become a cowboy. My girlfriend's probably the only Jewish cowgirl I know. I always kid her about that. And, you know, my girl's from Iran, and I always tell her, you know, uh, my being sober has helped you become a completely different person. So that's one of my jokes nowadays. But Billy, I don't know. I think we've kind of hit every topic I can say. Is
Yeah, yeah.
you
I
know, I
want.
mean, AA has completely changed my life, and being able to come on a podcast or go on a Zoom meeting and talk to people. I know, you know, I know nowadays I get a pretty good message. So I'm always interested in hearing what the other person has to say. So this is kind of my first podcast I've ever been on. So I hope it's been useful to somebody out there.
It's definitely been useful to me, and I'm just like so grateful that I have, I was brought in by our mutual friend, Brad, to get to know you and Jimmy D and all those good men that are helping, that I'm learning from to try and be a better man every day. Man, I can't thank you enough for this opportunity and this time having you on here and having this conversation. Before we get ready to wrap up.
But Billy, I want to tell you one thing before, I don't know when this ends, but yeah, you get back to the Johnny Velcro, When I first came into AA, my sponsor said, I want you to read Vision for You. So I used to introduce myself as Johnny Vision, Then after that commitment was over, we used to call it like the Vision commitment. But after that, I was the cake guy. So they used to call me Johnny Cupcakes. And then my first name was Johnny Pajamas because when I first got sober, I was in Sicily for a while, and I used to wake up and go to meetings in my pajamas. So I was Johnny Pajamas, and now I'm Johnny Velcro because the name just stuck. So I'm happy. I'll never leave Johnny Velcro because I want to stick with all the winners. Like I said, my voice is a little fucked up from the cancer treatments, but
All good.
Thank God on my last medical checkup, I was free from cancer. So I'm hoping next month when I go back, the voice thing is kind of a pain in the ass, but I hope I'm still cancer free. And I'll always be Velcro, and I'll stick with the winners like you, Billy. And I love my life today, and I love AA. And like I said, I hope some of you people out there, if you're struggling, Billy and I are always available. So Billy's got my information. If there's ever something maybe you can relate with me that you might not be able to relate with Billy, I'm always available. Billy's got my information. And I'll tell you, Billy, you're a great example of this program.
Oh, thanks, Johnny. So are you, man. I appreciate you so much. One last thing before we get ready to wrap up. Any message you have for our military brothers and sisters that are currently serving overseas?
Well, play a lot of cards, dudes. Play a lot of cards and stay out of the brig. And, we say, I don't know if Jimmy D beat me but with this quote, but you know what? Join the Marines and see the world, and join the Navy and pick up after them. And keep your head down and make sure your ammunition's dry. Love you guys. And I think that goes back to the Revolutionary War, but you know what? And God bless you guys. It's not a great time to be in the military. There's a lot going on, but you know what? Your family loves you. We love you. And give peace a chance. So everybody out there, thank God we have patriots. Thank God we have veterans, but also thank God we got people at home that support you guys. And I'm definitely one of them. So God bless you.
Awesome. Johnny, thank you so much for this conversation, man. I love you so much and just appreciate having you in my life. I get to get this wisdom from you on a daily basis. So I'm grateful for that. Take care.
Listen up! Hold on to your seats. Grab your girls, grab your beers.
Hey everybody, this is Charlie from Anthrax, and you are listening to today's Boondoggle.
This is Mark Metcalf, and you are listening to today's Boondoggle with Bailey on Domain Cleveland Radio.
You are listening to today's Boondoggle with Bailey on Domain Cleveland Radio. Yes, Kato Kalin listens to this all the time.
Welcome to today's Boondoggle. Now here's your host.
I am Monty Heath, so one Heath, and you are listening to today's Boondoggle.
Hey, what's up? It's John from Skillet, and you are listening to today's Boondoggle on Domain Cleveland Radio.